Greetings, everyone. My name is Emmanuel, and thank you for joining me today. Today is Monday, and we are going to continue our series on politics and Christianity. I have divided my series. On Fridays, I talk about the meaning and significance of the kingdom gospel. And then on Mondays, I talk about politics and Christianity. The reason I'm doing this is because the gospel of the kingdom does not only deal with our individual salvation, it also deals with national transformation and economic prosperity of our communities and nations. So the gospel of the kingdom has two pillars. The first pillar is to transform the individual. Once the individual is now transformed, those individuals who are transformed will now use kingdom principles and values and ethics to bring development in their various communities and nations. So the gospel of the kingdom teaches us about prosperity. God wants us to prosper in our different communities and nations. So the gospel of the kingdom is not just about personal salvation. See, that's one of the challenges that we are having in most of our churches around the world, and particularly in Africa. People just focus on the individual. You know, you are saved and you will go to heaven and that is it. No, that's a limited gospel. The gospel is about the transformation of the individual and the transformation of the society in which that individual lives. The prosperity and peace and stability in that society where that individual lives. So that's the essence of the gospel of the kingdom of God. So today, which is a Monday, we are discussing about politics and Christianity. And today we are talking about a serious topic. I know to some people it's very, very serious and important, and even to myself, it's very emotional for some people. So please don't be quick to judge. Just listen unto the end of this video. The topic for our discussion today is about, should Christians be calling on secular governments that are corrupt, to monitor the finances of the church? Should Christians be calling on corrupt governments to intervene in the affairs of our local churches? That's what we want to discuss today. Should Christians be asking secular governments? Most of these governments are already corrupt, to be involved in the affairs of the church. Should Christians be asking corrupt secular governments to get involved in monitoring the finances or the affairs of our churches? Now, this subject is very, very important to me as a young Christian. When I just finished from Bible school, that was in 1999, I just came back from Nigeria and I wrote my first book. That book is titled The Rights of the Preacher. The Rights of the Preacher. One of the things that I found was that governments always try to put obstacles to prevent the dissemination of the gospel. So they will attack the pastors, they will attack the churches. Early on in my ministry, after spending 2 years in Bible school, I was able to write this book to let pastors understand that this is what secular governments are doing. I saw that in the book of Acts. We are going to look at some of those passages. So this is not a subject that just came up, maybe like maybe in Nigeria, they are talking about karma, and in other places. No, I started thinking, and I've even written 2 books concerning this subject I wrote my first book in 1999, The Rights of the Preacher, and then my second book also that talks about state laws and church growth. So I saw the picture, I studied Paul, and I saw how Paul was called into the nations and the challenges and the obstacles that Paul faced when he took the gospel into the nations, how the government of the then Roman government, opposed Paul and his teachings. And in one point, Paul was even beaten and thrown in prison in 2 places that we are going to look at today. So when I had an opportunity to travel and to study, I also, furthered my education, and I studied law and government. I got a master's degree in law and government because I was interested. I wanted to know how governments work, how things are done. So I have some ideas about this. I have spent some time also studying about this subject, about government, politics, and Christianity. Like I said, I did my master's with a specialization in law and government, master's degree in law. So I understand to an extent how governments work. So I have a few ideas that I am going to share with you today. So please listen carefully so that don't be emotional in your judgments. Don't be emotional in your reaction. So please listen to my own point of my own arguments. And if you are thinking otherwise, you can share your arguments with me. Just write your comments, and I'm going to read your comments. So please don't be emotional. Just listen to my arguments. Now, the topic of today is: should Christians be calling on secular governments to intervene in the affairs of the church? Should Christians be calling on secular governments to monitor the finances of churches? Yes, I sympathize with many Christians who are frustrated with some of the pastors who are dishonest, who are exploiting, poor Christians who go to their churches and they ask offerings and they ask for tithes, and some of these pastors do not, help these Christians when they are in difficulties. Some of these pastors, they just use the money for themselves and maybe for their family and for building their own empire. I sympathize with many of you who have this view. I have seen, how some pastors are using money that they collect from their churches, to build big houses for themselves, to buy a lot of cars for themselves, their wife and kids, to use these resources that they get from the poor people for themselves without really, investing in the lives of these poor people who are suffering, who are going through challenges. Sometimes these poor Christians, when they ask the church for help, instead of the church helping them, the church will usually tell them, okay, the pastor is going to pray for you, the pastor is going to do this. But when the pastor has problems, the pastor calls upon the members of the church to help them. So to my pastor friends and to my brothers and sisters, I sympathize with you. I understand that you are frustrated with some pastors who are corrupt, some pastors who are exploiting members in their churches. I sympathize with you 100%. I myself, I write posts, castigating some of these pastors for what they are doing. I really sympathize with you, but let us consider the other side of the argument. Yes, there are pastors who are doing some unthinkable things. There are pastors who are in the ministry just to exploit people. There are pastors in the ministry who are there to oppress people, who are there to exploit the poor and the needy. They are there just to collect tithes and offerings. Yes, I understand that. And I sympathize with all those pastors who are, up in arms, criticizing pastors for the exploitation and how they are mismanaging church money. I sympathize with you. I understand the challenge. I understand the problem. And I know that there are some unscrupulous pastors who are doing those things. Nevertheless, my dear brothers and sisters, this is a serious matter. I believe that Christians should not be asking secular governments to intervene in the affairs of the church. The first reason is because these governments that we, especially Africans, are calling upon our African governments, to intervene in the affairs of the local churches. There is something that just came up in Nigeria. I don't really know it very well, but it's called Karma. How they are talking about, the government is going to appoint board of directors to intervene in the affairs of churches in Nigeria. And some of the big pastors are against it, and they have been making public statements that they are going to fast, and anyone who tries to intervene in the affairs of churches will die and stuff like that. The reason why the government is trying to get involved or to intervene in the affairs of local churches is because of the rampant corruption that many people have been talking about, that some pastors are unscrupulous and they are exploiting their members, collecting tithes and offerings and using those tithes and offerings for themselves and for their family members and their cronies. And the people who are going to these churches, they are not taken good care of. And sometimes people also accuse other pastors who have built maybe universities and schools. They will say that these pastors charge exorbitant, school fees, and the poor people in their churches cannot afford, to pay the tuition to go to these schools. I sympathize with your argument. I understand your argument. But sometimes also we have not really gone into these institutions. If I may ask you, have you gone into these institutions and maybe spent a month to conduct some research to really find out whether some of these pastors are not helping their members? Have you done that? From anecdotes, I believe that there are some pastors who have schools and they give scholarships. The scholarships might not be a lot, but at least they try to give scholarships to some of their members so that, they will be able to help them. For example, I give my own practical example. I studied in Benson Idahosa's College in Nigeria. I spent close to 4 years. I benefited from a partial scholarship, going to Benson Idahosa's College. And there are so many Africans, especially from French-speaking countries like Cameroon, Zaire, Benin, and even English-speaking countries like Ghana, who benefited also from either full scholarship or from partial scholarship from Benson Idahosa's Bible College. Just imagine if I did not receive the partial scholarship during the time that Benson Idahosa was still alive, I wouldn't have gone to his school. You see, and it is my understanding that during that time, Bishop Oyedepo was giving Benson Idahosa, I believe it was 300,000 naira every month. You see, so today, many people don't understand that, Bishop Oyedepo, even though many people are criticizing him, this man was giving to Benson Idahosa, Archbishop Benson Idahosa, maybe about 300,000 naira every month. And Idahosa was also getting help from other people. And that is why Idahosa was able to sponsor a lot of pastors around the world, especially from Africa. Today, if you can, you'll be able to count the number of pastors that have come out from Idahosa's Bible School. There are so many, especially when he was alive. He was doing a lot of good. And the money that he was using to sponsor us, myself included, and others, people were giving him this money. And Oyedepo being one of his sons, Oyedepo was contributing a lot of money, to Benson Idahosa. So I understand your feelings, how you feel about certain pastors who are, have private jets and they are exploiting people and things like that. But sometimes these pastors also are doing some things that are also important. They are helping people, even though that help is very, very small. But, the transformation of one person can result to the transformation of 2 people, 3 people, and 4 people, and things like that. Today, people are benefiting from what I am sharing on YouTube. It's as a result of the help that I received from Archbishop Benson Idahosa, who also received financial assistance from Bishop David Oyedepo. Now, there are 3 reasons why I am saying that Christians, even though our churches are making mistakes, even though some of our pastors are unscrupulous, even though some of our pastors are exploiting, their members, collecting tithes and offerings. They are good pastors. They are good pastors who are managing the resources of their churches very, very well. But there are some unscrupulous pastors also who have gone into ministry thinking that they just want to make money. Those are the dangerous ones, and those are the ones that we should expose, and those are the ones that we should be criticizing. But there are so many good people, pastors, who are in ministry to do their best. Let me tell you, ministry is not that easy. Ministry is challenging. Ministry is really, really difficult. And some of these people, they were nobodies 20 years ago, 30 years ago. When I was in Benson Idahosa's college, most of the great people in Nigeria, now we didn't know them. We didn't know them. But those people, they persevered, they were obscured, but today they are great men. They suffered, and God has blessed them now. So let us be, even though we can criticize them for, either exploiting people or doing certain things that are not really nice, but we have to be careful also the way we do it. But the question that we are concerned about today, so understand me very well, my dear brothers and sisters, I do not support the dishonest means that some pastors are using to exploit their members, taking tithes and offerings, and exploiting their members and not helping them. But I'm also saying that some of these pastors also do things that are correct, are right. I've given my own personal example. And this subject has been of great interest to me, since 1999. So I'm not just talking about this subject now because of what is happening in Nigeria and in Rwanda and in South Africa and in other places. I'm talking about these subjects because I've spent some time studying it and doing some research. Like I said in the beginning, I did my master's in law and government, in law, but with a specialization in law and government, because I wanted to understand the interface between church and state. I wanted to understand the interface between politics and Christianity. So today we are talking about, should Christians be calling upon secular governments to intervene in the affairs of the local church? I would say no. Christians should not be encouraging governments. Christians should not be calling on secular governments to intervene in the affairs of the local church. Christians should not be asking secular governments to intervene in the affairs of our local church. The first reason is because these secular governments, especially our governments in Africa, they are corrupt. Now, these our governments in Africa, Not only in Africa, around the world, even the Western nations, the developed countries, their governments are also corrupt. So we as Christians, we cannot be asking a corrupt government to intervene in the affairs of the local churches. And some of these churches, rightly so, you say they are corrupt. So why should we be calling on a corrupt government to intervene in corrupt churches? When we do that, what we are doing is that we are increasing the level of corruption in our society. First of all, some of these our governments, particularly the governments in Africa, these governments are failed governments. They operate failed states. These governments cannot even provide roads for their people. They cannot build schools for their people. They cannot provide electricity. You know, I love Nigeria. I'm not a Nigerian. I spent 4 years in Nigeria in Bible school. And after so many years, I went back to Nigeria and I spent 4 years again, working in Nigeria. That's 8 years. And the Nigerians have been suffering about the issue of electricity for so many years. And, the infrastructure, roads, water. These are challenges that have been there since I studied in Nigeria in the late 1990s. And these challenges are still there. It shows you that some of our governments are incompetent. They are corrupt. They cannot solve the basic problems that governments were established to solve. Governments are established to protect the people. But in some of our countries, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, in South Africa, people are kidnapping people anyhow. The government is not protecting people. When there is a robbery somewhere, can you call the government? Can they even come to intervene? No, you're on your own. So the basic responsibilities of our governments, they are incapable of doing it, of serving the people. They cannot provide roads. They cannot provide security. They cannot provide water. They cannot provide electricity. They cannot provide hospitals. When our government leaders are sick, they run abroad. They go abroad to receive treatment. But they cannot think that they have the responsibility of building good hospitals in their own countries, where they can go to those hospitals and receive treatment. They prefer to travel abroad. When they go abroad, they don't just go empty-handed. They carry a lot of money and they pay bills to these foreign hospitals, and they stay in apartments that they rent. There's a lot of capital flight that goes when our heads of states and ministers and the big guys are sick. So they take a lot of our money out of Africa to Europe or to China or to other places because they are sick. But Africa is not poor. Africa has a lot of resources. We have a lot of things that we have: land, we have water, we have mineral resources. Our land is very fertile. If we had competent leaders, Africa would be self-sufficient in many things. In food security, we'll have a lot of food. Our waterways will be developed. There will be industrialization. There will be so many things. But we have corrupt leaders who don't care about the development of their own nations. They are just concerned about themselves. When they are sick, they go abroad to treat themselves, and they take a lot of our money abroad. That's capital flight. That money could have been used to build hospitals in our own nations in Africa. But what do? They don't care. What about the roads? They don't even care about building the roads or repairing the roads. Just imagine the number of people that die as a result of bad roads in Africa, in our various countries. But these people, these leaders, they don't care about that. Just imagine the number of people who are killed, by armed robbers, the number of people who are kidnapped, especially now that we have this religious fighting, even in Nigeria, Boko Haram, and all of this, fighting here and there. A lot of innocent people are being killed. And these, our incompetent leaders, they cannot do anything. They cannot provide the basic necessities for their people. And these are the same people that Christians are asking and calling them to come and appoint board of directors to supervise the church. I mean, Christians, let us think. These people are, first of all, they are corrupt. Why would you want a corrupt person to come and be monitoring the affairs of the church? Do you not know that when a corrupt person comes to monitor the affairs of the church, because the person is corrupt, he's going to add to the corruption that is already existing in the church? That is why you are criticizing the pastors. That is why you are shaming the pastors. You are naming them and shaming them because you have seen the corruption that is in the church. So why do we want to call, the government that has not shown us the proof that they are competent? Why do we want to call these corrupt governments to come and be monitoring the affairs of the church? If the government was competent, if the government was providing roads, if the government was accountable to the people, if the government was building hospitals, if the government was really serving the people, yes, we can understand that that kind of government can come in and straighten things up. But most of our governments in Africa, they are corrupt. So we should not be asking these corrupt government officials to come inside the church to monitor the affairs of the church. Yes, some churches are involved in some fraudulent activities. We are going to discuss what we can do later on, how to stop this. But we as Christians, please, I'm begging you guys, we should not be asking the secular governments to come and intervene. I told you in the beginning that I know what governments are capable of doing. Most of the governments around in Africa and even in Western nations, they are corrupt government as well. So we should not, as Christians, be asking for corrupt governments to intervene in the affairs of the church. Jesus is building his church, and Jesus knows how to correct some of the abnormalities that are going on in our churches. That's the first reason. The secular governments are corrupt. They are incompetent. They cannot even manage their own affairs. Why should we be calling an incompetent and corrupt government to come and add their trouble in our local churches? We shouldn't be doing that, please. We shouldn't be doing that. There are men of God that I respect who have been doing some very powerful work, to transform the church, to speak against the evil that is happening in our churches. I applaud those men of God. But please stop calling the government to intervene in the affairs of the local church. The government does not have the authority to do that. Yes, the government, every one of us, Paul tells us we should submit to our governments. Romans chapter 13, we all know that. In Peter, it says that. In Titus, the Bible says that we should respect government officials. We should obey government officials. But don't forget, Paul also tells us the purpose of government, which I'm going to be discussing in the future. You have to understand the purpose of government, why God created government. God created government for a particular purpose. And if the government is not fulfilling that purpose, the church does not have the responsibility the church has the responsibility to challenge the existing government, even though the church is going to pay a price because the government has the sword over the church. But that's another topic. But my point today that I'm begging Christians all over the world, please do not encourage the government to intervene in the affairs of the local church. Because if the government has her way to intervene in the church, I am telling you, when they come in, with time, they are going to deal with the church seriously. That is why we must not give a foothold to the government to come into the church. Yes, some churches are corrupt, but that should not be, the ground upon which we should be asking the government to intervene in the affairs of the church. The government people, most of them are corrupt. Secondly, most of them are incompetent. Even if you allow them to be board of directors or maybe to come into the church to manage this church, they cannot manage their own government. How would they be able to manage the church? You see, they will bring their incompetence in the church, and instead of helping the church, they'll be spoiling the church. So please, that is the first reason. The government is corrupt. The government has incompetent people. We should not be asking them to intervene in the affairs of the church. Now, the second reason is that when in government, when you put a layer of control or a layer of oversight, that layer of oversight, it will attract corruption. It's very serious, what I'm trying to share with you today. Very serious. You see, in the world today, we have federal governments and unitary governments. In a federal system of government, power is shared between the federal government and the states. And in a unitary system of government, power is devolved from the central government to the subnational government. So what the government does in unitary states is that the government appoints, their own officers to control the subnational governments or the regional and local authorities. And whenever the government puts control mechanisms or creates offices to control, the local governments, those offices are means by which these government officials take bribes. So when Christians who don't understand how government works, you are calling for government to create an oversight body over the church. What will happen is that those government officials who will come to oversee the church, they are first of all corrupt people, and you have now added another layer. And that layer of that you have added, you have called for, will be a layer of corruption. And they will be taking the money that the church is taking from the people through tithes and offerings. The pastor, in order to do certain things in the church, will have to take permission from those board of directors people. And those board of directors, they will not make it easy for the pastor. So what will happen is that the pastor will be giving them money to bribe them so that he will be able to do certain things in the church. So when you are calling for an additional layer of oversight or supervision in the church, what you are indirectly promoting is corruption. And that is the thing that you as a Christian, you are fighting against. So you are not happy about what the pastors are doing. I applaud you for that. But when you are asking the secular government to appoint people to control the church, you are indirectly encouraging corruption, because those people will want to take money from the pastor. And the pastor will now, how is he going to get the money? The pastor will also create fraudulent means to take money from the people. So you are adding corruption upon corruption in something that you are trying to fight. You see, you have a good idea. You are angry about what is happening in our churches, and I applaud you for that. You are annoyed. All of us have to be annoyed with the corruption that is taking place in our churches. But the solution is not for you to be asking a corrupt government to appoint officials to supervise the church. No, don't do it, please. Because when the government appoints people, those people will encourage corruption in the church. They will want the pastors to give them money. Remember, when these people come to supervise the church, they will be holding meetings. Do you know that when they will tax the church, they say, okay, if we are going to be holding 5 meetings in a year, the church is going to pay our transportation. The church is going to cook for us. The church is going to find a place where we are going to sleep. The church is going to do this. They are going to put conditions upon the church. And at the end of the thing, because the pastor will not want to have conflict with the government, the pastor will give them brown envelopes. So all of that is corruption. So what you are trying to solve, which is a noble issue that you are fighting, but because you don't understand how government works, you are instead promoting corruption in the church. You are adding to the already existing corrupt practices that are in the church. So my dear brothers and sisters, we have to be careful the way we approach the government. The government, first of all, is corrupt, and most of the people are incompetent. So we should not be asking the secular governments to come and control the church. The second reason is that when we ask the secular governments to come and control the church, they are going to promote corruption, because it is a layer of supervision. And anytime you add a layer of supervision, you are encouraging corruption. Go and talk to the people who work in government. I have worked in government, so I understand how government works. I have a master's degree in law and government, so I understand how governments work. I have done research study, so I understand how government works. So when you put a layer of control over a group of people or an institution, what they will do is that those people who are controlling the people below them, they will always want money from those people. And that leads to so many things that are not good. So that's the second reason. The first one is that secular governments are corrupt. So please, let us not encourage them to intervene in the affairs of the local church. The second one is that they are incompetent. They cannot even solve the problems that are facing them. How can they solve the problems that are facing the church? So we should not. The third reason is that when we are encouraging secular government people who are corrupt and incompetent to come and supervise the church, we are adding another layer of corruption. The last point, there are so many, but I'm going to end here. The last point is that when we ask the secular government to send people to control the church, do you know what you are doing? Do you know what you are doing? Most of the secular governments around the world, they are enemies of Jesus Christ. You don't know that? That is what Paul himself tells us in the Bible. This is found in the Old Testament. Anyway, let me just read you a couple of scriptures so that you know that what I'm sharing with you is not just, I'm not just speaking even, it's in the Bible. Look at Acts chapter 20. Look at Acts chapter 4, verse 26. You know, the disciples were arrested by the Sanhedrin and they beat them up. Why? Because they were preaching about Jesus Christ. And this is what the apostles said. Verse 26, Acts chapter 4, verse 26. It said, the kings of the earth stood up and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. Did you see that? Did you hear that? The kings of the earth stood up and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. So whenever you are asking a secular government to control the church, you are asking an enemy of God to control the church. How would you want your enemy to control you? Don't you know that your enemy is going to destroy you very fast? Most of the secular governments are enemies of Jesus Christ. That is why Paul tells us in the book of 1 Timothy chapter 2 that we should pray for all men to be saved, especially kings, so that they will come to the knowledge of Christ. Because who is Christ? Christ is a king. And when they are saved and they come to the knowledge of Christ, they will now submit under Christ. And they will no longer be enemies of Christ, but they will be servants of Christ. Do you understand that, my dear brothers and sisters? So please, let us not ask the secular governments. They are our enemies. They are there to oppose the gospel of the kingdom of God. I tell you, if some countries like Nigeria and other places, you guys are lucky, to have a country that at least respects Christians and Muslims, and you can practice your religion freely. In other countries, when we were just starting in ministry in the 1990s, we faced a lot of challenges with the government. Why? Because the government was corrupt. Sometimes, the people in our quarter will even come into our churches and break all our chairs. When we take them to the government, they will not do them anything because the people will go behind us and bribe the government. So the government, first of all, does not want churches to open. Even, for example, in Cameroon right now, I don't even know if there is any Pentecostal government that has the legal papers to operate. So the governments, most of these governments are against the church. They will allow the nominal Christians to operate, but the Pentecostal churches, they will not give them the documents to operate. And when you don't have the legal documents to operate, sometimes the government people come and harass you people, destroy your things. You don't have any case because you don't have the legal papers to operate. They will tell you guys to compile all your documents and send them to the ministry. And those documents will be there for ages upon ages upon ages. You don't even know who to contact. You don't know who to talk to. When you go to this office, they tell you, oh, it is the other office. What are they asking? They're asking for bribe. You have to give them money. And when you give these people money, they will tell you, oh, no, it's not our office, it's the other office. You have to bribe them again. Then this other group will get the money and say, oh, no, it's not our office, it's the other office. You have to bribe them again. See, you are a pastor. You are not supposed to be giving bribes. But these people will frustrate you. They will complicate your work until you will be tired. The reason they are doing that is because they are against Jesus Christ. They are against the gospel of God. Most of them are enemies of the cross. Most of them are enemies of God. So why would you allow an enemy to come and be supervising what you are doing? He's your enemy. Jesus tells us in John chapter 10 verse 10 that the enemy comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. So why would you allow a secular government to come and be supervising the things in the church? The church does not belong to you. The church belongs to Jesus Christ. Jesus is the one building the church, and the gates of hell, is trying to prevent Jesus from building his church. So the devil is using politicians to oppose the church. You have to understand that. People don't understand this because they don't understand the gospel of the kingdom of God. Oh, my dear brothers and sisters, we should be very, very careful. Look here in Acts chapter 24, verse 26. Let me tell you a story. In Acts chapter 24, 26. It concerns Paul. Even in Acts chapter 16, remember Paul was beaten and put in prison for preaching the gospel. But look at this in Acts chapter 24, verse 26. It says, he hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might lose him. Wherefore he sent for him often and communed with him. This is Governor Felix. This is Governor Felix. He was the governor of Caesarea. Paul had a problem with the Jews. And because he was a Roman citizen, they quickly secured him and took him to Caesarea, where he was to see the governor. The governor wanted Paul to bribe him. The governor wanted Paul to give him money. And because Paul could not give him money, the Bible says Paul spent 2 years in prison in Caesarea because the governor will not allow Paul to go. And until another governor came in. Do you see what secular governments can do to stop the work of God? For 2 years, Paul was in prison. Could you imagine what Paul could have been doing for those 2 years? The Bible tells us that in Asia, when Paul was there, I think 2 years, 3 months, the whole of Asia province heard the gospel because of one man and his few companions. Paul spread the gospel. gospel in the whole of Asia for 2 years and 3 months. But he was wasted in the prison because he refused to give the governor a bribe. Governments are corrupt. Governments in Africa, they are corrupt. Governments in Europe, they are corrupt. Governments everywhere. Governments are corrupt. Some of the leaders may be good people. Some of the leaders may want to do the right thing. But what we call the deep state, the people who are in the bureaucracy, those guys are dangerous. So we have to be careful, my dear brothers and sisters. I understand you have a legitimate reason for criticizing pastors who are exploiting Christians. You have a legitimate reason for criticizing pastors who are taking money from poor people, who are collecting tithes and offerings. Yes, you have a legitimate reason for criticizing those unscrupulous pastors. But please let us be careful let us be careful in calling the secular governments to come and control the church, because we are indirectly, doing more harm to the church than helping the church when we are calling secular governments to intervene in the church. I will close with this. Jesus has ways of stopping corruption in the church. We all know there are some pastors, I don't want to call their names now, in Ukraine and other places. Some of them have been challenging, pastors around the world for the corrupt practices. And my dear brothers and sisters, some of what they have been saying is working. There are many pastors now who are very careful, about what they preach and about what they do. It's as a result of Christians who have, on Facebook, on the internet, they have been shouting and they have been naming and shaming some of these pastors who are exploiting their members. And some of them have changed and some of them will change. So what the Christians are doing is having, an impact. Let us, I would prefer us to be doing that than to call the secular governments to come and intervene in the affairs of the local church. Look at what this young man in South Africa is doing, exposing some of these false prophets. What he's saying is having an impact. There are many people who are going to some of these churches now. They are no longer going to these churches. That is what Christians are supposed to be doing. The Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 11 that we should expose evil. When you see evil, expose it. Name and shame the people that are doing the evil. But please, 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 do your research before you accuse a man of God. Do your research before you defame the name of a man of God. So please let us be careful. We can expose the wrong teachings. We can expose the fraudulent activities in our churches. But please, please, we should not be asking the secular government to intervene in the affairs of the church. First, because the secular government, most of these governments, especially the governments in Africa, are corrupt. Why do you want a corrupt government to intervene in the church? The second aspect is that most of these government officials are incompetent. Why do you want an incompetent person to control the affairs of the church? They will bring that their incompetency in the church. The third reason is because when you ask for a level of control in the church, it will promote corruption. So let's not do it. And then the fourth reason is that when you ask the secular government to control the church, you are actually asking an enemy of God to control the church. The secular government, most of the leaders, they are not happy with Jesus. They are enemies of the cross. They are enemies of Jesus. And when you ask your enemy to control the church, what do you think your enemy will do? Your enemy will destroy the church. Even though you have a good intention, your issue is to stop the corruption in the church. Your heart is good. Your thinking is good. But the solution that you are suggesting or you are providing to solve the corruption in the church will not solve the corruption. Instead, the solution will add more problems to what is already existing in the church. We are going to continue this teaching next Monday. But for today, we are going to stop here. My dear brothers and sisters, leave your comments, please. Watch this video. Share this video with your friends and family members. Our hope is to stop the corruption in the church. And our hope is that Christians will not be asking secular governments to intervene in the affairs of the church. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until Friday, bye-bye. On Friday, we are going to look at the gospel of the kingdom. Very, very important message is coming up on Friday. So please join me on Friday. Until Friday, bye-bye.